Fabulous. Here they come. I can see them all walking right into the room here, right? Welcome, everybody. We're really glad to have you joining us here on another QB Power Hour. Today's topic is niche nuances, legal or niche nuances, depending on what part of the country you might be from. I happen to say niche. I think Linda says niche. So either one's acceptable, but we are talking about the legal industry today. We have two wonderful guests joining Dan and I today. So we're very glad to have you guys all joining us for this. Wherever you're located, I hope you are staying safe and healthy and cool, because it's been crazy hot in a lot of places lately. My name is Michelle Long. I'm a CPA with an MBA in entrepreneurship, the owner of Long for Success. I've been teaching QuickBooks for longer than I care to admit, because it makes me feel really old when I say that. But very glad to have you guys joining me today. Dan, you want to go ahead and talk about yourself?
Oh, okay. I'm your co-host today, Dan Long, owner of Danwit, former of Intuit technical support and trainer, writer, technically edited QBO for Dummies, and my new project is new partner, chief content creator at School of Bookkeeping. So joining us today, we actually have some two people, and this is actually a first. So for the QB Power Hour, we've had some niche nuances in the past, but we've always looked at it from the accounting professional. So today we're actually going to be joined by someone working that industry. So Bryan Canavan, which I misspelled his name, I'm sorry, and Lynda Artesani, but we'll correct that in other slides. So Bryan, you want to introduce yourself a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I'm Bryan Canavan, and I have my own law firm. It's called Canavan Law, and I'm primarily an estate planning attorney. I do some other things as well. I help out with some family law cases and child support and things like that. We're also a type of law firm that not only does the estate planning, but also does litigation in the estate planning field. So I do get out from behind the desk every once in a while and go down to court. Back when we used to be able to go to court. So I became an attorney in 2006 and opened my own firm in 2012, and have lots of ups and downs and turns and curves, but having a lot of fun doing what I do.
Awesome.
Great.
And Linda, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Lynda Artesani, Artesani Bookkeeping. I'm like Michelle, been doing this a long time, probably 25 years in total as doing accounting work and bookkeeping. And I've been a generalist for most of that time. Just recently, 2016 was when I started to think about going towards the niching of my business. And in probably about 2 full years now of just exclusively doing that. And really this year was my first year that I said, I don't want to take any other clients at all. I'm at that point now where I'm just getting the organic leads, because it's a lot of work to put yourself in that position. And it's hard to say no, but it's actually good for the client too, because I really only want to do the work with the attorneys. And I think that being able to do that is going to help me grow as a professional as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today and taking time out of your day to talk to our audience about your industries and the unique nuances of those industries when it comes to keeping track of the business. So a little bit about upcoming webinars for the QB Power Hour. Of course, today is the niche nuances for legal. Next, so it's every other week. So every the next one in every other Tuesday. There we go. At noon. There we go. But next up, we're going to have our last in our four series from QBO Advanced, the roadmap. Where is it going? So we're actually going to have a product manager from Intuit come on and talk about QuickBooks Online Advanced and where is it headed. So if you want to be part of that conversation, that would be a great one to attend as well. And then we're actually, we've spent a lot of time talking about QuickBooks Online. We're actually going to bring in some desktop topics. So coming up, we're going to be talking about QuickBooks special accounts. So these are accounts that have specific functionality tied to them inside of QuickBooks. So we'll also talk about online and desktop with that episode. But then we're going to be talking about QuickBooks Desktop utilities. things about the data file and things like that. Is, you know, if you're trying to get a file up to QuickBooks Online, that will be a great one to attend as well. But if you also live in QuickBooks Desktop with you or your clients, this is going to be a great episode as well. And I'm working on trying to get someone from the data services department of Intuit to talk about their perspective as well, because I just had to send a couple files up to data services, and you know, it's an interesting thing of what happens behind the scenes. So our PDFs of the slides are available on that link. You can click and get all the PDFs of all the handouts that we have. And if you miss an episode, you can view a recording on YouTube. We are streaming live as well, but that will be available on YouTube as well, and we'll post that into our Facebook group as well. And we also have the podcast, so you can join us there as well. So our agenda. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, okay. I'm rambling on.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to cover one more admin detail for our attendees that are listening live. We would love you guys to communicate with us and ask questions with us and stuff. But if you could ask your questions in the Q&A box, that way we're able to respond specifically to your questions and stuff. If you just want to chat with one another, then you can do that in the chat window. And we do want to thank Matt for joining us. Matt Fulton is joining us to help with the Q&A as well. So again, use the questions and answers box so we can reply specifically to your questions. If you just want to chat, then you can chat with each other. And thank you again, Matt, for helping out today.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Matt, for joining us. So our agenda today is we're going to talk to the industry professionals. So we'll talk to Bryan, we'll talk to Linda, and just kind of get their perspectives. And then hopefully what we'll uncover is some of the specific industry challenges that come up as a legal professional or an accounting professional in the legal industry. And then, how do you overcome those challenges inside of QuickBooks? And then, you know, maybe touch on some other solutions. So our first question, poll question that I'll be launching here is, what version of QuickBooks are you using? Because sometimes that will have some specific niche or nuances in and of itself. You know, what version of QuickBooks you're actually using. So QuickBooks Online, I know, Linda, you love QuickBooks Online Advanced. Actually, it's just a specific one. And if you joined us last time, Linda was on talking about a little teaser about what we're going to be talking about here today, but how she overcomes some of those challenges in advance, right, Linda?
Yeah, that's my favorite version. I don't even bother with the other ones anymore because it's got a lot of things that are inside the product that you would pay extra for. And one of the things that's big is the workflows, what we'll get into as we get deeper into the webinar.
Awesome.
Well, Linda, like with the QBO Advanced, once you start using some of those features, it's hard to go back to not having those available, like the workflows or those custom fields. It's like once you've learned to utilize them, and I love that you're going to share this with everybody today, but I can see why you don't want to go back, because it's hard to give it up once you've started getting used to that.
So true.
That's actually how I felt about, you know, QBO. Once I learned how to navigate and the tips and tricks and things like that, when I'd go back and work in desktop, it just seemed so clunky and dated after getting used to what I could do in QBO. So QBO Advanced just takes that a whole nother level. So I think that's great.
Let me go ahead and close the poll here and share the results. So majority using both. Yeah. QuickBooks agnostic. But right behind is QuickBooks Online, 29%, and only QuickBooks Desktop at 10%, and some that doesn't apply. Maybe they're using 0 or not even using QuickBooks. Maybe they're attorneys. Right. Let me go ahead and stop sharing the results there. So let's talk about Bryan. Bryan, Bryan's actually a part of my BNI group. So if there is anyone joining us that is in BNI, you can certainly reach out and connect with him. And I believe this may count as a one-to-one, sure. Because we are going to be talking about just a little bit about how you started in the legal industry. You know, one thing that strikes me most from my experience with you is you're not the typical lawyer. You know, when you when you think about that, I mean, your quote that you have here, God works wonders now and then. Behold, a lawyer, an honest man.
I was going to say, I think I'll take that as a compliment. But
I mean, you're not just an exceptional lawyer, you're an exception to being a lawyer, in my perspective. Tell us about how you started in the legal profession.
Well, I think it all kind of goes back to when I was a little kid and I saw A Few Good Men for the first time. You know, I think I wanted to be Tom Cruise's character more than anything else that I ever wanted. Sometimes when I give presentations, people ask, you know, what other previous types of jobs have you had? And I haven't. You know, I worked at law firms as a clerk, and I worked at law firms as a file clerk and a courier, and then all the way up until when I was in law school and then a licensed attorney. So I can't do anything else. So I guess that's how I got started. When I moved, I went to law school at Michigan State University, but always wanted to live in Arizona. And when I came out here, I knew that I didn't want to be in the criminal field or anything like that. So I started looking for jobs and was lucky enough to find one with a small firm doing estate planning and probate work. And I worked at a couple firms, and after about 6 years of experience, decided to open my own firm. And that's pretty much what led me to where I am now.
And Bryan, you and I chatted just a little bit about that transitioning from working for a firm to going on your own. Because like you and I talked about, I had worked in public accounting and worked at firms. And then when I went on my own, I know I had a lot of challenges and struggles. And do you want to share some of the struggles that you had going on your own, particularly around the accounting and bookkeeping area?
Absolutely. So they don't really teach you how to be a lawyer when you're in law school. I mean, at best, you're taught how to think like a lawyer, and some of the case law and some general concepts. But running a business is not something that's really focused on at all. So, you know, in addition to understanding how businesses are set up, and that, you know, there is such a thing as electing S Corp status and things like that. One of the biggest concerns that I had that I immediately figured out was that I didn't know how to keep books at all. So that was a huge eye opener. And of course, there are all the concerns that we have about making sure that we have great accounting for our trust accounts and things like that, that are immediately relevant when you realize that, you know, it was nice to have somebody setting those things up for you when you work for the firm.
And can you share with us a little of the requirements around trust accounting? Because like I was shocked when you said how many different ways you have to keep that and everything. So you want to share some of the requirements and the ramifications if you get things wrong?
Right. So the first thing is that every year when I fill out my application or my renewal for my bar membership, they ask, tell us about your trust account and where you hold it and who's responsible. So sometimes if you work for a firm, you're not, as an attorney, responsible for the trust account. You know, there has to be a responsible attorney. As it's just me, that responsible person is just me. We are required to keep at least 3 different recordings of our trust account. So for me, I have a spreadsheet that I keep, as well as a physical book. My accountant also has access to my trust account, and I have my bank account. So I actually keep track of my trust account in 4 different ways, which was recently very relevant because we did have a little bit of a computer problem at our office. I think maybe a file just got moved to a different spot in Google Drive, but we ended up finding it, so it was okay. But if I needed to recreate that trust account, I would have been able to do so, but it would have taken a long time. Every penny of client money needs to be accounted for at all times, and there are all sorts of rules about that. The consequences for not doing that are basically disbarment and potentially even criminal theft charges. So it's something that whenever I have anybody in my firm that even remotely has access to any of the 4 different ways that I keep track of my trust account, that's the number 1 rule, is that must be worked on first to make sure that it's always completely accurate.
Now, one of the things that I get confused on is the word trust, because you handle living trusts, and then we're talking about trust accounting. Is that are they one and the same, or are they separate, different?
I can make it even more complicated for you.
Oh, great.
So in the estate planning field, I help people create living trusts, which are the documents that pass your things on from you to your beneficiaries, oftentimes your children or things like that. We also create what's called a living will, which is similar to a living trust. That's the document that talks about how you want to be treated at the end of life, like machines or no machines. Our trust account is the trust account that we keep open at the bank, that it contains our client's money. So oftentimes, if I start a family law case, I may tell the client that we need what we call a retainer. And that retainer is not my money yet. I haven't earned it, but the clients are putting it on deposit so that we start working the case. So for example, if somebody were to give me a $3,000 retainer, I would put that money into a separate bank account, which is called an IOLTA account, which is an interest-only lawyer's trust account. And that money sits there until I send them an invoice, at which time I then transfer their money from the trust into my operating account because I've earned it at that point.
Gotcha. So yeah, that cleared it up and confused it, I think, all in the same breath. But it does make a lot of sense. So you could actually have trust accounting in the legal profession, but not do trusts.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely.
And
that is, I'm sure that we're heading in that direction, but one of the biggest challenges that I found was finding an accountant and a bookkeeper that could work with me in understanding that when I took money for my trust account, that wasn't necessarily income to me right that moment, and making sure that it went into the appropriate areas on QuickBooks and things like that, which I still don't even completely understand. But I'm lucky enough to have folks like Lynda that help me out.
Well, and I think you're going to like what Lynda's going to share today. And I was telling you earlier that I think you might even find that you want to change a few things because Lynda's got some great tricks up her sleeve.
There you go.
And one of the things that I find interesting now that we're talking to you, Bryan, is that you're in a niche. So it's like a sub niche of estate planning specifically. How did you get involved? I mean, just tell us a little bit about that story of how estate planning became what you specialize in.
Well, I've always liked to help people. I have always kind of thought that I'd like to be the kind of attorney that people send a Christmas card to. So in addition to, never wanting to practice in the criminal field, I had no interest in being a prosecutor or a public defender or anything like that. I just always thought it was interesting being able to help people and provide value for my service. And help families understand how to pass on their legacy to either other family members or to charitable organizations or things like that.
Was there a specific moment that you can recall, or a particular case where it's like, aha, this is what I want to do, and this points me in the direction I want to go?
Well, I was always interested in the subject in law school, but we did have in my family, we had an interesting estate planning scenario where a family member passed away and things were not set up correctly. And a large portion of the estate ended up going somewhere where we imagined that our deceased family member didn't really want it to go. And there was nothing that we could do. It was attorney prepared in another state, but not prepared in the way that we think that it probably should have been. And so that was an eye-opening situation. But, you know, I also wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to also go to court and litigate cases from time to time, because I need to argue, you know, as much as possible.
Awesome. Well, okay, so that's the introduction to Bryan, and we'll bring you in as Linda goes through what she's going to go through, and see if you know, from the legal professional perspective, if how that coincides with what you're experiencing in your profession. So in second poll, I'll launch that here. Do you currently work in a niche?
And
So
while
our choices are yes or no, still deciding, or no, I prefer to be a generalist, like a jack of all trades. Go ahead,
So while
Linda.
they're answering that question, Linda, I think this one might be for you. Sarah wants to know, she has an attorney who pays all the bills from operating. He transfers or reimburses the operating account from the trust account. I have a new client who pays all bills related to clients out of the trust account. Can they do either method?
Yeah, I've seen both. I've seen attorneys. I have an attorney in Texas, you know, that does family law, and they pay right out of the IOLTA. And then I have, most of them do advanced client costs, which is one of the terms we'll get into. And we put it up in the balance sheet. And then when they do their actual invoicing, when they invoice for their time and their expenses, they get reimbursed for it. So it doesn't affect their records at all. It's an in and an out. But it's both methods. Most of the time, it's the advanced client costs method, and they don't actually pay them directly out of IOLTA, but I have seen both.
Okay, and that kind of goes along with Carrie's question. The best practice for recording expenses that the attorney's client will reimburse the attorney. I've heard different methods. Bryan, do you want to comment on that as well?
I handle it the way that Linda just described, is that we create an invoice, we put the expenses on the invoice, and then we bill it to the client's trust account.
Awesome.
Great.
Go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So the main top answer is 40% no, still deciding. So Linda,
yeah,
pressure's on.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny because I sat in their shoes for a very long time where I wasn't sure. I mentioned in the last webinar that I've always followed actually what Michelle has talked about, like when the online first came out, whether or not I should go there or should I not, or, you know, then kind of went there because you started talking about how it was getting better, and I jumped right in. I love the automation. Actually have to give my daughter credit. She started working for me and I still hung on to desktop, and she was doing all the online ones and everything was being done faster. And I said, I got to figure out why is this happening? And then I started learning about the apps and the way that technology could be used. And it's surprising when you work with law firms, how few of them are actually using technology. They still do a lot of stuff with paper. They still print a lot of paper. They have a desk. There's so many programs that are out there. I was surprised. One day I decided for my blog post, I would do a whole bunch of blogs on all the different products. There's thousands of products out there, which is hard for the attorneys because they tend to like, what do I use? What's the best one? And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. Once I decided to niche, the call of you can get paid more to do this. I think a lot of times people sit on the fence, like maybe I'll get really bored. That was definitely one of my fears because I loved working with all different businesses and learning about the different businesses. I loved working with startups. But I sat back and structured down to like 3 niches and picked law firms because I loved working with attorneys. They're the consummate professional. So to be able to work with them, they work in time all the time. So they're really good about not taking too much of your time. Like if they have a 15-minute meeting, it is 15 minutes. They're on time. It's done. They get to the point. It's, you know, whatever you need to talk about. If you ask them for a document, because they spend a lot of their time asking for documents, get the document like that. That's the really cool part. So if you work in any other field and you're trying to figure out which one, maybe you have an attorney or two. That's how I started. I actually didn't have a lot of attorneys that I worked with, but I looked at who I worked with and who did I like to work with the most. Had a local attorney here in Fort Myers that I worked with, researched, tried to find the best apps. I just got lucky. I discovered Lien Law and how well it worked with QuickBooks because I love QuickBooks. I've always worked in QuickBooks and put the 2 pieces together. I started adding the receipt capture features that I was able to automate some of the accounts payable. Back then, you didn't have advanced, so we added an app for like receivables, because most of the law firms are really bad about collecting on their receivables. If they're not doing it through trust and it's straight up accounts receivables, they're actually not great about collecting and staying on top of it. So it's a place as an accountant, you can jump in and actually help them get some money and get some cash flow in their firm. So it's that part of it's just been a lot of fun, and niching is not boring. It's been really important to set up your workflow, stick to it, and just go with it. And I have to say, I'm not bored at all. It's actually the opposite.
That's interesting that you say attorneys make good clients for those reasons. They're the time and the documents, because that's stuff that, you know, people in the accounting profession, you chase all the time. Like, I need your bank statement. I need, you know, I need this or that or the other thing. So that's an interesting aspect that you bring up. How did you get? How did you start determining? I mean, where did that? You said that was about in 2016 or so was when you started really looking into specializing. Did you just set all your clients up and say, okay, these are three general areas, pick one and go with it? Or how did you then decide which niche was for you?
I was very fortunate. I was in 97 and up with Seth David, who was my mentor, and we talked about it. And one of the things that was great about working with a mentor is that he would bring that subject up. We would talk about how you can make more money. And he said, just take your list. I threw it, of course, where would you put it if you're an accountant? On a spreadsheet. I rated them. I rated the clients and how I like to work for them, good or bad, had like columns, sorted the columns and made that decision. And he said, Linda, and I was really freaking out because I was like, I love all my clients. How do you pick? And I just sat back and said, why do I like this one or that one? And obviously for attorneys, I had a little bit of recession proof. I love working with contractors, but that was more of an up and down business. I love working with real estate. I own real estate. So that was one of them that I kind of stuck to. But I just sat back and kind of weighed the options. And I really had great relationships with the attorneys that I had on my list. And I just did a spreadsheet and figured out which one came to the top. And Seth said, pick three that you want to work with and sit with it for a bit. And that's exactly what I did. And the other two just fell away, and it just made it a logical choice for me.
Okay, so let's talk about the legal niche. So what is it you would want to know ahead of time getting into that niche, before you get into that niche, you know, shallow end of the pool type of stuff?
Yeah, so first thing you want to do is study the lingo, right? So I gave you a little list here. Advanced client costs. So these are the things that when you're engaging with your client or your prospect, you need to know. If you're going to tell people you're specializing, you need to know how to talk the talk, right? So advanced client costs are those fees that the attorney pays for upfront before they actually do the billing. So they're paying for it, then you get reimbursed when you bill. So it's an account on your balance sheet. So it's an asset account. And I've seen books, because we do a lot of migrations. So Sarah Prevost and I are partners, and we do a lot of data migrations. We're taking people off of desktop programs like PC Law or Juris and putting them, and other ones too, and putting them into QuickBooks and Lien Law. And we see, like, I've seen some books where the attorneys actually think their books are right, but then I've seen things it's on the profit and loss report. And there's another method. You can do it that way, but the better method is to do it as advanced client costs, especially if you're using like an app like Lien Law. Lien Law, that's how the functionality works with their two-way sync. Case or matter, it's their actual physical, you're going to matter. If you think about the word matter, so like Bryan was mentioning, if he has a client that comes to him, does estate planning, that's their case or matter. So it's just some terms that you need to know when they're discussing it. And you just got to learn the industry a bit. IOLTA, again, he talked about the IOLTA account, trust account. Those can be kind of intermixed in language. It's a bank account. A lot of the clients we get would think that their bank account, they might have it balanced perfectly on QuickBooks, But the bank account in the IOLTA account, so it's not the attorney's money, it's a deposit. The individual accounts that equal it, like little individual checkbooks, but all equal one, has to equal to the penny the bank balance. So even though it can be reconciled, if those monies aren't right, then your IOLTA is not right. And as Bryan mentioned, it can have some pretty extreme repercussions if it's not accurate and right to the penny. It's not like you can, say up or down or like a cash drawer. It has to be perfect. So, and it's important, they have to even report it sometimes depending on where they are. They have to report it to the ABA. They can do, the Bar Association can come in and do a spot check audit on them. So they have to make sure their records are right. Pre-bills is another one. It's a draft. It's a draft of the invoice as you're doing the processing. So the attorney will start to, every month, most of the times they'll do it on the 1st or the 1st and the 15th. They'll do the billing for the prior month. And a lot of times it's part of my job is I'll pull together, they start to collect the time. We get the expenses in that they've prepaid for that we put up in client advance cost. And then when it's time to bill, we group those together and create a draft bill. They use the word pre-bill. A lot of the law firms use the word pre-bill. It's the same thing. It's a draft bill. They review it. They say yes or no, it's ready to go. And then you bill it out. Three-way reconciliation is, again, that bank account has to match the total liability account of all the monies that you're holding as deposits, including adding up all the individuals. So all those things, the bank statement, the bank account, and all those individual accounts have to match. There's no way around that. So if you're going to go into this niche, you really should be that person that, I always laugh, people make fun of me for many years. I might even had a few conversations with Michelle on the Intuit community about, do you stay on it for a penny? A bank, if you're one of those people that's like, it has to balance, I can't sleep at night, this is a great niche for you to be inside of, because some people that they use that account reconciliation discrepancies. I wish that wasn't even enough.
I was just thinking about that, Linda, because when I've taught QuickBooks, especially like through the SBDC, the local community college, we have end users in there, and you can ask, and about half the room will keep looking for it to find it. The other half, if it's off less than $1, they're like, I don't care, let's just reconcile and move on. That doesn't work in the legal industry.
No, not at all. Not at all. So in getting to work with your attorneys, learn from if you're going to take your first client, because you think this is the niche you want to go into, if you get in a client, the one I had, the very first one I got that I still have in Fort Myers, like he worked with me. He helped me learn a lot of this stuff and a lot of what they go through. It's helpful to learn what they go through in their day-to-day. He goes to court. He's a workers' comp attorney. So he goes to court and he's just a straight up nice guy. He happened to be from Boston. I'm from Rhode Island originally. So we had a little connection there. We had the accent going on, but he really helped me learn a lot about the nuances of working with attorneys. Definitely if you're a cloud accountant and you start to work with, I'm in Florida, I can work, I've got attorneys in Massachusetts, I've got Ohio, Illinois, California. You got to know all the rules. In Florida, you actually have to, on every IOLTA transaction, as you take in the retainers or the customer deposits, you have to take a copy of both sides of the check. Now, a lot of firms do that on paper and they photocopy it. But in today's world, I use HubDoc, pull the transaction into the bank. I got both sides of the check. I attach it to the document, or I attach it to the transaction in QuickBooks, and everybody's happy because it's right there for them. So that's something, but not every state requires that. But if you get a client in another state, definitely go on that site and learn what the rules are, the local rules are as well. Targeting your social media, if you're going to go into niching, and this is for any niche, no matter what you pick, start to target your social media and marketing towards legal. So if you're going to be doing it for legal, you got to start to do that. And it's not instant. Nothing with social media is instant. It's taken 2 full years for the organic leads to start flowing in for me. I've had referrals, but the ones that are coming from YouTube and my blogs, 2 full years of blog posting once a week. So you got to be consistent with your blog posting too. It's sometimes feels like a task, but keep putting it out there, You want the attorney to go in and start to, I've been asking now, how did you find me? Well, I typed in IOLTA bookkeeper and it came up and I'm like, oh, I don't know how I did that, but yay. Just figure out, if you start to tag and you start to hashtag things, it'll start to come through. And then you
Yeah,
have to have.
I wanted
Sure.
to talk a little bit about that, because you had mentioned that before when we were chatting,
Mhm.
that as soon as you decide to do a niche like this, it's not like the floodgates open
No.
and boom, here comes all these attorneys, because you've declared it to the world that I'm going to, I'm right. I mean, that would be ideal, but you know, from your perspective, it took some time, and there was some actual doubts on your side of
Yeah, there
the
were.
fence, right?
Yes, there were.
I do the
I
right
know
thing.
Matthew's on there answering questions, but he can attest to many freak out phone calls where, you know, the lead stopped. So you went from all these leads coming in to all of a sudden it's like crickets. And I'd be like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I can't do this. There's no leads coming in. It'll be like a few weeks of no leads. And I'm not, and especially nothing coming in from the law firm. And then he'd be like, just stop it. Just stop it. You're doing the right thing. And you need that phone a friend buddy, right? Because when you have those freak out moments, because it is the right thing, because you can charge more. You can charge more and you can do more high level advisory stuff, the fun stuff where these attorneys are great at what they do. They're professionals. They understand all this stuff. But like Bryan said, they don't learn like accounting in law school. So they don't really, our job is to help them learn like, what did you do for marketing? How much money did you spend on marketing? Where are your leads coming from? And most of the times they'll say, oh, I spent X amount on, I got a firm I hired, and how is that going? And where did your leads come from? Oh, I don't know. Well, if you're not tracking it, how are you going to know what's working? Like me not knowing where somebody found me because they typed in IOLTA, I need to find out what I did right so I can keep doing it, right? That's the main part of it, you know. And the last one is actually having money in the bank. So make sure if you do decide to do this, make sure that you have a little cash pile. And, you know, accountants are actually doing pretty well right now with all the stuff that's been happening around us, with all the things client needs are happening. And most of the accountants I talk to are not really seeing a downturn in work, and they're actually doing better. So it's a great time if you've got extra money in the bank account to hold you through the times when it starts to slow down, and when you start to really focus your marketing towards not being generalist, and you stop getting all the calls, like you're not getting 4 or 5 a week or whatever, your typically get 1 a week, and they start to stop and you start to have that little low. You want to have the money to get you through that time. And yeah, this is the biggie with working with attorneys. And this is the part that makes me feel like Superwoman when I get to meet them. Because Bryan's going to pop in here. You guys love paper. I mean, I think I've saved like a whole forest of trees at this point with some of my clients, like stacks of paper. It's hard when they do the pre-bill, like they want to print the pre-bill on Lien Law. And I'm like, no, just log in and then approve it. It's just a click of a box. But
yeah, we have a paperless office, and I have to buy a box of paper every month for our paperless office, because that's just how it works. Yeah, it's easier for me to review a draft of something on paper, or at least I've convinced myself of that. But yeah, technically we're a paperless office. So
I can't tell you the last time I bought paper or checks. Those two things are kind of not in my world anymore, but it's definitely paper centric. We had a law firm that was printing 2,000 invoices a month. And because of the program they were using was actually a program that made you print, even if you emailed them, you still had to print the whole pile. And now they're on Lien Law, they don't have to print anymore. So we've saved a lot of trees there. Most of the law firms are very deficient in technology. They have very manual processes. I run into a lot of attorneys that when I get involved in the law firm, it's usually the younger partner that just comes in and they're like, I can't look up the balance on my phone. If I'm in court and I'm trying to collect on a rent, an eviction, I can't find it. I have to call the office, and that's usually what starts the conversation. And it's generally older partners kind of like, I don't really want to change. It works, don't change it. But yeah, if you can get them to understand that, a lot of them are just blown away by the fact that I can attach a document to a transaction. So it really does make you feel like superstar when you get involved with them, because they want to know more. When I start to work with them and show them how they can do things without having to click a million places, they're like, what else is out there? What else is out there? Which is kind of fun. And then again, like I talked about, the implementing the advisory services. So we get more deep into the numbers and more into where can you save, what can you do to help the law firm grow. A lot of them are growing, and how do you grow in a smart way instead of just kind of like growing without any direction, maybe a budget or a forecast. And that's the part I think Sarah and I really love digging into.
Some other challenges,
Yes.
besides the fact that they're connected to Latin. What do you see technology wise?
Yeah, data vulnerabilities. I've had a few of them that I've worked or talked to that have actually had cyber attacks because they're in the desktop products. And a lot of times people don't understand that actually the cloud products like QuickBooks are really secure. And even like email, you know, these things, like I use Liscio for my contact and communication with my clients because it's really secure. There's no data flying back between my client and I without having it be in a secure place. It's just something that we just hands down there's no wavering on. We specifically stick to it. And it's important because we don't want anybody's data to ever get compromised or hacked. They definitely spend too much time on admin tasks. I think that sometimes they don't realize that there's another way. Accounts receivable and collections, I have yet to find a firm that we haven't been able to either find money that they haven't billed. That's a big one when we start to get into the migrations and we're like, well, what is this client? This seems to be kind of old, and why does it have a balance? They all want to clean their balance up when we do the migration. They've got these balances that have been hanging. And a lot of times we find, which is fun to find money that's been sitting there in the retainer, and the actual attorney had done the work, but they never billed, or they forgot to bill, or they cut the check, never, moved the money over or whatever. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, marketing, where the lead's coming from, that's a big one. Trying to figure out, because it's sometimes there's a lot of attorneys in a generalized place, and you have to really figure out what would work best for you to get the people walking in the door, get the clients walking in the door.
Is there any size, like, do you specialize in like a size of a firm, like or the age of a firm that really fits with you, or do you could be a sole practitioner or a multi-partnership firm?
We've been working, we've got both. We've got the solo practitioner, and we've got all the way up to what we call mid-market, when you're getting into we have one that we just had 45, there's 45 people on staff. So it's really either way. Sarah and I prefer to really work in the mid-market. It's kind of been our sweet spot, working with the larger firms, but either way, we've worked with both. And obviously this is my favorite app, Lien Law. It's very automated and it works really well with QuickBooks. There's multiple apps that will work with QuickBooks. A lot of them don't work very well. They'll disconnect, or we've got one recently that just sent everything double. And I don't have that problem with Lien Law. Lien Law is a time and billing software for attorneys. It has a two-way sync. So if I have the law firm upload the bills, so we'll work hand in hand with the staff in the office. If I have them upload the bills into Receipt Bank, we will back code them, or we'll have it set up. Like a lot of them use the same vendors all the time. So we'll back code them to client advance costs, if most of the expenses are that, or if it's something like to do with the overhead in the firm, we'll code it there. But then we'll have to just tack the matter on, push it into QuickBooks, so the document gets pushed in with the transaction. So it's right there for the attorney to see that the matter's been tagged. And then Lien Law will grab it and pull it up in advanced client costs waiting to be billed. So it's a magical process that's got me not touching anything, not clicking. It's uploaded, it's processed. I just have to put the matter on. It goes into QuickBooks to be paid, or if it's been paid on a credit card or something like that, it's in there, and then it gets pulled up ready to be billed. It's just the sweetest workflow. Lien Law also has a lot of attorney-specific reports, and they're just an app company that I'm so happy I discovered them, because they're a smaller firm, but they're very, very much, it's a family, like a family bunch of people. They're not all family, but they're like a family. They're very open to anything. If there's a firm that might need a specific report, the developers are open to adding certain buttons and reports to make their product better. They're always open to that. They're really, really, they give you leads. So if you're a Lien Law accounting pro, you just have to sign up. they'll give you leads. They get people who come to them all the time and they don't know how to move off of like a Cosmolex or something like that into QuickBooks Lien Law. We specialize in that. So they'll shoot the lead over to whoever is maybe local to that person, or even if it's somebody that they know, that like Sarah and I are so good at PC law conversions or jurists or any of those. We've done quite a few. The bigger firms, they'll shoot it over to us. We'll do the work. And that's a great referral system. So if you're thinking about this niche, learn lien law, check out their app, become a lien law accounting pro, and then you'll be set up to get some referrals from them as well, which is a real win. It's a company that really values their accountants. They love working with the attorneys, but they value their accountants because we're the ones really working mostly in the product. The attorneys do too, to track their time. But for us, they really want to make sure that we're really happy, and they want to make sure the accounting side works. So it's powerful when you add QuickBooks, because QuickBooks is a platform QuickBooks is a platform, accounting platform, right? So it's a lot of these products that are like a Cosmolex, for example. Cosmolex is a product that's for attorneys, but it doesn't really do the accounting part very well. It's like the accounting was the afterthought. So when you put lien law and QuickBooks, you've got a powerful 1-2 punch, really.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you're a big fan of lien law. And,
I'm very big fan.
and really excited about some of the upcoming changes that are coming with regards to lien law and QBO Advanced.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what exactly that's going to look like, but they are talking about a partnership and a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be our next polling question. Would you like to learn about some legal solution apps that work with QuickBooks? Like maybe we could have lien law on the webinar, or some of the other ones that do work with QuickBooks. And I'm using air quotes there. That is one of the big things about the apps, is what does it integrate with, and how it integrates with QuickBooks, because it may synchronize, but maybe it's a one-way communication, yes. Or maybe it's in a way that doesn't work for you, as an accounting professional. So we definitely want to understand that.
And Linda, you were talking about lien law. Does the document image sync into lien law, and then along with getting images, the QBO receipt capture, how does that compare? And would you recommend that, or do you want to answer those two? And then sure. I do know we want to keep going through your slides before we do a bunch of these, but
the lien law works with QuickBooks. So when you create the invoice, it actually pushes it into QuickBooks. Now, the good part about lien law is you can go into lien law and click, like the attorneys stay in lien law, they can see their invoice, and they can see the invoice that they've created. So the images are more for the billing part. So someone would have to have the ability to see, well, actually you can click it from expenses. So when it's in an expense or in a client advance cost, if it's got a connection, they have to be able to get into QuickBooks and have a user, but they can click the little QB icon and it will bring you right to that transaction. So they do have that ability to see it. And then, yes, it'll open up QuickBooks, it'll open up the transaction. So if it's like a filing fee, it will open it up. You'll see the client that's attached to or the matter, and you'll be able to see the picture of it. So it's fast. Like you can see even in the trust account, you click the little QB icon, it brings you right to it. So some of the attorneys we work with have like 2,000 matters. To try to go through that list is hard, but with lien law, if I'm going in, I just search for it, I can pull it up, and then I can click and pull myself right into QuickBooks in that section. So I'm trying to balance out the trust account and the IOLTA, making sure everything balances that three-way reconciliation.
That's great. Thank you.
Good overwhelming majority, 72%, saying they would love to hear more about it, because you're definitely, that's where, like you had mentioned earlier, that's where the attorney sits a lot of times in the lien law, and then you stay in the QuickBooks, and
it's every accountant's dream to keep the client out of QuickBooks, right?
Yeah. All right, Linda, we're going to let you get through the rest of your slides here, because you got great info, and then we have more questions for you at the end.
Okay, sure. So for the advanced client cost part, we're talking about, we'll get into QuickBooks Advanced. The three features that are the biggest power players for me, why I want to use QuickBooks Advanced over any other, is the workflow feature, which is that automated feature where I can make sure that I know if there's undeposited funds. There's a lot of pieces to it. custom fields, and the business performance center. If you want to go to the next slide, I think the workflow is here. So you can see that there's a lot of different pieces, and it keeps getting better. Like every time I pop in, like, oh, there's a new one, there's a new one. So you can track, this is where you can be powerful with your client on helping them with the AR and automate it. So there's a way to invoice a client, and then when the invoice is due, it'll automatically send another email to the client saying, hey, invoice is due. And then another one if the invoice is late. So these are things that are set up that I used to pick another app to use to do this, but now it's baked into QuickBooks. So this saves you money, because that other app was like $50 a month, and this is right inside. So when you start to look at the pricing of QuickBooks, this makes it a no-brainer to go to a program that's got all the pieces in it. You want to go to the next one, Dan? If you're doing migrations like we're doing, this is like the creme de la creme of the features, because I'll work with an attorney where maybe there's an older partner who likes this one thing in his file. I don't want to switch from PC law. I like this. Hey, I can put that in your program with custom fields. As you can see there, I can do the original trust date, completion date. Sometimes they want to know the completion of a file, matter name, originating attorney. All these are opposing attorney. You can add all these pieces in that you'll be able to track right in the software. So the ability is 48 now, custom fields, 3 different types. The types are important because you get the drop-down list. If we're doing like tracking by attorney, you can do the initials, and then you're not making mistakes. If you added a 3rd initial, you're just keeping the data really clean. The date field is important. And of course, the text one is also really powerful too. And then a few of those fields will work in Lien Law. So there's a couple of fields that you can add here, and I know they're probably going to try to do more, that will actually synchronize right to Lien Law. So I use those fields now to pull in matter, name, and things like that. Those 2 fields will sync to Lien Law, which is really cool. And then this is like, I love this, especially between the cash flow and tracking revenue streams. So like Bryan had multiple areas that he works in. I would be able to kind of track that so you can see where he made more money, which is important, because you might love work in one place, but if you find that the estate planning is much more beneficial, then you might want to weigh that. And it's a way for me to track revenue streams inside of QuickBooks Advanced, which we have a lot of powerful tools with the reporting that's in there. And like I mentioned earlier, steady niche. I'm not really worried too much about the economy with most of them. We were talking earlier about how the divorce attorneys are, unfortunately, it's kind of rising up. They're getting a lot more work right now due to the circumstances we live in. Basically, it's recession proof. Most of the attorneys are pretty busy. Even during the lockdown, when everybody went remote, they still stayed busy. Even though the courts were closed, they stayed busy. It was interesting to see, because I wasn't even sure how it was going to be affected, but it's been interesting to see that most of them are very, very busy. And then these are the features. We talked about roles too before on the other webinar. So the roles are important, especially when you get into mid-market, where you've got multiple people that may need access to QuickBooks. Online Advanced has the features where you can do multiple roles. So I can do, maybe the receptionist collects money and applies it to the account. That's all that she can do. She can't see any bank accounts or anything like that. QuickBooks Online Advanced has that feature where you can make sure that those pieces are only, the people that are in the file can only see what they can see. I've had it where they've had older partners that are really kind of phasing out, but they still want to view it, but they don't really want them in the accounting, but we'll give the view only even user. I've used that one as well.
And we just talked about the
Performance
Center and the custom fields. What else we got here? Okay, so.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, don't go to that one yet. We have some great questions for Lynda. Sorry. So Lien Law, is that a case management software? And if so, why is there a need for custom fields in QBO? Is it redundant?
So Lien Law is a time and billing software, not a case management system. So it's not like a Clio that has a lot of other pieces where you're doing the CRM, you're tracking clients and customers. It's not that. So it's less expensive, but it doesn't have some of those features that you're probably thinking about. We could like do case, they can go and do case research and things like, doesn't have that. So you'd have to have other software. Doesn't have like file storage to it. So there's other pieces, and they are working on some of those things to add to, like working at some of the things that I know about that I can't talk about yet that are going to be coming up with Lien Law. But I think that you'd be very happy if you move to it. And there's plenty of other ways you can get around some of those pieces. And a lot of the clients I know that I've worked with that have come off of other software, they actually don't really use some of the things that they thought they were using. So I get into conversations and I find out that they wanted all the bells and whistles in one place, and then they realize they weren't using them, and they're paying, like, some of them are paying like $125 a user, where Lien Law is in the $50 range for the higher level, and you get all the reporting and everything with it.
And Bryan, can you share what you are currently using? And also, do you have any specific questions for Lynda?
I use MyCase, which is a software that I had a business partner for a few years, and that was his favorite, but we were always trying new ones. I can tell you that there is the hesitance to ever switch. So
Yes.
understanding that it's easy to transfer those things over, I just think in my mind immediately, that sounds like a headache to move things over. And we've had trouble exporting stuff like that before. So, but I'm interested. I'm going to check out Lien Law, and you can probably expect a call from me at some point.
Oh, awesome. I actually am working with a client right now that was doing it with MyCase, but it wasn't really working with QuickBooks. They could never get it to work. They could never get anybody to pay through it. So, and then he was just doing everything in Excel. So we're working with him to pull him off, because that's what Sarah and I like specialize in, is getting you painlessly off of what you were on. We have been changed from time slips. We've done bill for time. I mean, there's probably a laundry list, which is good for us because we get to see like what doesn't work on some of these, and where the clunkiness comes into factor, and how we're able to bring them on. And we always find it fun. Like, we always like high-fiving each other going, hey, we got them off of something that, because it's so fun to come in and they're like, when you're teaching them, they're kind of frightened by the training part, and they're like, that's it. That's all I have to do to click. And yeah, that's QuickBooks. It's simple to work in. And then Lien Law is very simple and straightforward. And Lien Law does a great job of training the attorney side for us. So we just do the accountant side.
Okay.
Awesome. So Lynda, you mentioned time and stuff. Somebody wanted to know, is Tsheets a good app for the legal niche?
I've not used Tsheets for tracking the time for attorneys. I don't see how that would work. I do have contractors that use it. I just think that because Lien Law is specific to law, you're able to get the reporting on that side. They have a lot of reports that are pulled from the side of the attorneys. And then the advanced client cost piece, you would make more steps. It's less work just to go with what works for law firms, I think. I suppose you could do it though.
Yeah, I think one of the nice things about Tsheets is the whole geo fencing.
It's
you really
cool.
wouldn't have that need.
You don't need it for attorneys though, right?
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't be tracking. And then I see you get a question about, does it work, Lien Law work with desktop? That would be a no.
Perfect.
Online only. Also.
Okay. And Dan, if you want to go ahead and launch that final poll question for some people that might have to leave, but Lynda and Bryan, do you have a few extra minutes where you could stay? And we've got some great questions here. If you got a few extra minutes and you'd like to stay, is that okay?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the question of switching from another system, Sharon wanted to know, do you have to learn the other system, like Case Law or MyCase or whatever it was? Do you have to learn the other system before you can transfer from that other legal system to Lien Law and QuickBooks or things like that?
If does she mean like her, I don't know, she means if she's doing the actual migration, you do kind of have to learn the product when we start to extract the data out. Most of the online ones you don't, because it's an easy out, because it's online and you're moving to online, it's the same. But when you get like to PC Law, there's specific reports that like Sarah and I pretty much just figured out which ones to use. A lot of the desktop ones are Thomson Reuters, and they're all kind of similar. So they have a similarity to their reporting. One of the things we've found with working with the desktop ones is they don't handle the accounting piece that well. And we've always seemed to be able to help the client make sure they get the money right to the penny, and figure out, a lot of times they go through and they start to clean up and get offload a lot of those retainers that might be, some people have like 1 cent left, but you have to return it, right? It's a retainer. You either have to earn it or return it. So that's the big part of working with the clients and doing the migrations. It's a lot of fun, but we've worked through a lot of processes for it. But it wouldn't be a bad idea, I don't think, to learn it, to know, especially if you start to do that, what's the weakness in the product and what you can speak to with the new product.
So if the attorney is using, or if you guys are using lien law, then what do they use for case management?
A lot of them use, they go outside of it. I'm trying to think of the name of it right now. It's not popping into my brain, but a lot of them they manage their cases a lot of them use Microsoft Office 365. So they use a lot of the products there to track their matters and cases. They track a lot of the matters inside of lien law as far as the trust side of it. For case management, you mean like researching and studying? A lot of them use online services for that, for the most part.
Bryan, do you want to add anything in there?
There's all sorts of different products.
Yeah.
I mean, it's endless. I've had, there are some of the time tracking companies that also have, like Time Slips has some stuff in it that will pop up and tell you when your statute of limitations is coming up, or if you've entered in a custom field that talks about, when some other deadline is. But lots of them, there are endless. I get messages all the time from different case management or time tracking softwares.
I think Clio did or does too. Clio has that. It's a little bit more robust on that side, but it's not a product I want to really work in.
We use separate programs. We use Westlaw for legal research.
Westlaw, that's it. Thank you. That's the one.
And then my case for the case management, which has a time tracking feature, which isn't the best. And then we have QuickBooks. Our bookkeeper has QuickBooks. Mm-hmm. So it is interesting to think about trying to put all those under one roof.
Mm-hmm.
So Bryan, I have a question for you. I worked in a law firm. I started in high school all through college. And I did, draft and help do the document prep for a lot of the wills and trusts and things like that. So my question for you is, we're talking about time tracking, and I know the lawyers I worked for used to track it in 6-minute increments, but yet it seems like more and more lawyers, especially when it comes to wills and trusts and things, it's a fixed fee. If you want this trust and this will and whatever, this package is going to be $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever the case may be. So are you still time tracking for those where we like to call it value pricing, where it's a fixed fee? Can you give us some insight on that?
I refer to it as a flat fee, and I don't time track on those cases.
Okay.
That for estate planning purposes. There have been times where I've taken family law cases on a flat fee because the client wanted some certainty as to the total cost. Of course, that's always a roll of a dice because you never know whether the case is going to take 3 months or 3 years.
Right.
So I don't love doing that, but I have done that for clients before. In family law cases, I do keep track of my time. In the event that the opposing party acts unreasonably and I ever need to go to the judge and try to justify my fee if we're asking the judge to award attorney's fees for my client against their ex-spouse.
Gotcha.
So I do track sometimes, even if it's a flat fee.
Okay, very good.
And when we do hourly cases, we do bill in 6-minute increments. And I do keep track of my legal assistants are all trained in keeping track of their time as well. Oftentimes I go in and no bill their time, but clients like to see who's working on their case and things like that. So, we keep track of all of it, or try to.
Great.
It's
and
interesting.
Linda,
It's interesting that you and your profession have some of the same concerns that accountants and bookkeepers have in their profession about tracking time. Do I charge by the hour? Do I do flat fee, or do I just bundle it all in? So some of the things we connect with and some of the things that are independent of what it is that we do. Michelle, I stepped on your question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm just trying to rapid fire these questions out here because we had several of them here. Linda, somebody else wanted to know, do you also help with technology implementation such as CRM apps for firm? And then Bryan, after she answers, do you use a CRM app? And what are your thoughts on that? So Linda, do you help with implementing those? And then Bryan, what are your thoughts on CRMs?
We have actually with Salesforce and with HubSpot. Is that what it's called?
HubSpot. Yeah.
HubSpot. Yeah.
HubSpot,
That's the one the two that really, in fact, HubSpot's in beta with QuickBooks. So it synchronizes and works with QuickBooks. And I think Salesforce is also. Those are the two major ones that with the mid-market firms that they like to use because it tracks the leads and it tracks all that important stuff that you want to know that, before it actually become a client. So yes, we do help with that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Bryan?
and we don't use it. So
Okay.
that's probably part of the blind spot of the spending your time running the law firm and needing more time and assistance doing that other stuff.
Yes, that's true. Sometimes it's hard for us to take care of our own business. You're too busy doing the work to do some of that other stuff. So that's great. Okay, Linda, what do you use for paying bills? You said you're paperless, no paper checks. I would tend to think it's probably bill.com, but what do you use for?
Actually, I don't have a lot of bills, but I pay them either with a credit card or and synchronize it, or I pay it right through my bank's website. I don't really use. I am looking into Milio, but I have not gone down that road yet. I haven't had a lot of time to do it, but I've heard great things about it.
Bryan, how do you all pay the bills or submit the filing fees and things like that? How are you all doing that in your firm?
We write checks.
Okay.
Oh,
And I mean, on the ones that you can set up online bill pay, you know, we do that. You know, we pay our Verizon bill and our Comcast bill online.
Okay, but for court
So
filing,
you know,
for filing fees and stuff, are you able to submit online payments to the court for some of those costs, or does it have to be checks?
I write checks.
But you could, right? Pay by credit card sometimes, or debit card if you have to.
Yeah, I have a courier service. Where I'm at is about 25 minutes from the courthouse. So my courier service takes down checks for me. And when I file myself, I pay with my business debit card.
And that's very normal and typical, actually, for most law firms.
Okay.
Yeah, my staff, I have 2 staff members under the age of 25, and they can't believe that we actually write checks or send envelopes with actual stamps on them and things like that.
Do they even know what a stamp is?
we had a long discussion a couple weeks ago about what a self-addressed stamped envelope was.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's where, some things are slower to adapt. We now we just had the tax deadline, and I know I have one client that I still do their taxes as well as my own, but we were able to pay all that online, and it's easier than ever. So hopefully the court system will eventually get there to where we can be doing online payments and online filings and things like that as well. So Linda, way back early on, when you were talking about learning about the legal industry and the legal terminology and stuff, you mentioned something about going on the state website. What would that be titled? And or somebody else wanted to know, where could you go to learn more about legal bookkeeping and accounting? Do you have any recommendations?
Sure. So for the state website, you go to your local bar association. So I would go to Florida if I have a client in Florida. If I went to California, I do California. If you want to learn more about the legal bookkeeping, join our Facebook group, QB Community Live. I'm there. We have a lot of people that have kind of followed me through there. Become a Lien Law accounting pro, learn that software, and then join us on the meetings. We're doing a meeting tomorrow, and Sarah's going to be joining me. We're going to be on with Jonathan. They help us know the new features. They got a lot of really new cool features coming out, and join us and you learn about we get into some of those topics. Follow my blog. I do posts on all that stuff. As I learn things, I've been writing articles about that stuff, and you might want to just follow my blog and learn a lot of things. There's a whole bunch of content on there already over the 2 years.
Awesome.
We've been posting your slide of all your contact information.
Yes,
so
I see that.
I think your phone's going to start ringing off the hook here if I keep this up much longer.
That's okay. We're more than willing to help. That's one of the things that, Matthew's in the background, but it's one of the things we're always willing to help. That's our kind of our MO in our group. We're there to help everybody. So if anybody needs any help, join our group. We're there. And there's a lot of people, we got a lot of great people in our group too that will help.
That's great. And Bryan, I see your contact info there now. Are you willing to answer questions? And can you do estate planning and services for other states as well? Because I know with lawyers, sometimes you have to be licensed in a particular state, but when it comes to wills and trust and estate planning, can you do that in other states as well?
I'm always willing to answer anybody's question. Our firm provides free consultations. We are limited as to what we can do outside of the state of Arizona.
Okay.
So generally speaking, people need to have some tie to the state of Arizona, own property, visit here frequently, be a resident of the state of Arizona. The longer we go, the more often states are recognizing the license of other states and giving reciprocity. But right now I'm just licensed here.
Wonderful. Well, I know I really appreciate both of you sharing your knowledge and expertise. And Bryan, we were joking earlier. I'm glad you didn't start the clock when we started the webinar.
Yeah, we're currently on 1.2.
Okay. This is some of that non-billable time, I hope.
There you go.
But we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and coming on with us, and Linda sharing your tips and stuff. I think this has been fabulous, and I hope everybody had some great information as well. Dan, you're the one that organized all this. Fabulous job. 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I think this was great having someone from the industry as well as an industry professional on at the same time to really kind of bounce those.
It's cool.
This is what is what I deal with, and this is how I solve for that at the same time. So this was great. I really appreciate you both for joining us today. Any closing thoughts, Linda?
No, I really appreciate you guys having me on again. I feel like a superstar 2 times in a row, but no, it's been fun. And following you guys is important because you keep us on top of all the industry stuff. I've been following QB Power Hour forever. But if anybody needs to reach out, please reach out if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help. Moving to a niche is scary. I can be your phone a friend, buddy.
That's great. And I just wanted to share one last comment with y'all. Robert said 95% of this pertains to Canada also. Thank you very much. So you guys are helping people internationally. So fabulous.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. I know we ran a little over the hour, and I really appreciate everyone for joining us here today. Again, next time is QBO Advanced, the roadmap. So join us for that. Again, have a great day. Thanks for joining us again, and stay humble, stay healthy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.